Welcome everybody to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library, a virtual edition. My name is Gene Rule, and I am one of the small group of volunteers that put this program on every Sunday morning. And again, as most of you know, we're physically located at the Marxist Library in Oakland on Telegraph Avenue, about a mile south of the UC Berkeley campus. And we're looking forward to the time when we can get back inside. But we're doing fairly well, I think, with Zoom and everybody. And we've spread out quite a bit. So we have people from all over the world, basically, tuning in and or watching us on the YouTube channel. And our programs are recorded and are on YouTube, and we'll announce that later on. So again, it's always a great pleasure to be here on Sunday mornings, and good to see everybody here. As you know, the library was formed out of the collections of two remarkable Marxist scholars, Roscoe Proctor and Carl Niebel. And their collections form the core of the research library, and we've also been a community center that rents out space for progressive groups to have their meetings and seminars. So it's been good. And then somewhat later, the Institute for the Critical Study of Society was formed in order to further the work of the library and also do research and outreach educational work. And we've gathered together a group of, I think, very capable people. Some of us are members of definite tendencies and political parties. Others are not. Some are very independent. We're all very independent, as a matter of fact, but we don't all share the same opinions on things, and we have no party line that we try to follow. But we are all committed to the work of Karl Marx and a belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been for the past. And if you share our belief in that regard, please let your friends and even comrades know about us so they can get in touch with us. And as you know, we take the work of Karl Marx very seriously, especially his work, his well-known words on the 11th thesis on Feuerbach, that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And I can think of no better exemplar of this principle than our guest today, Wadi'h Halabi, a Palestinian scholar. And he will, I think, give us a very good presentation. And to introduce Wadi'h, Yusuf, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. It is a pleasure for me to introduce Wadi'h Halabi. He's a dear friend and comrade and political mentor. And 50 years ago, I engaged in my first political action by distributing some pamphlets. He and Sandy were distributing. Wadi'h Halabi is a long-time activist. He is from Jaffa, Palestine. He currently resides in Boston. He also heads a center for Marxist education, not similar to what you have here. He's a member of the CPUSA Peace and Solidarity Commission and the Economies. He's a brilliant scholar of Marxist economics, and his specialty is the socialist countries after the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Soviet Union himself. And we are very honored. Sure, it will be a very interesting and novel talk. Without further ado, Comrade Wadi'h Halabi.
Oh, thank you all. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. What happened to the Soviet Union? Despite extraordinary achievements, this mighty working class building fell in 1991 as if termites had eaten its foundations. Why didn't the communists and workers' movement in the Soviet Union and worldwide mobilize to defend working class power as it came under attack in the 1980s and 1990s? Why is international labor solidarity so feeble today? Why is there so much disunity and consequent defeats ever since the last major victories of a working class in Southeast Asia in 1975? In what critical ways did the Chinese Revolution differ from the Great October Socialist Revolution? This provides important guidance, I think, for coming work. And considering the setbacks and accelerating social and environmental destruction, is there a material basis for revolutionary optimism today? Let me touch on that very briefly, this question of revolutionary optimism before proceeding and telling you a little more about myself. The dangers to humanity of war, of global, social, environmental, public health disintegration are growing, in part actually because of these accelerating threats. That's one basis for actually an increase in optimism. As Marx pointed out, the whip of reaction urges the revolution on, but it can't be that alone. The states of the working class, the states formed by socialist revolutions, have grown in strength in recent years while imperialism has weakened. But turning optimism into victories requires conscious mobilization of the working class's past achievements. So those accomplishments include Marxism, they include communist parties and unions worldwide, and the 5 states, which is down from 17, created by socialist revolutions. The accomplishments also include the remarkable development of the productive forces and the reductions in poverty in China, Vietnam, and Laos in particular. China's creation of a meaningful currency and Cuba's development of ecological agriculture. And this presentation owes a fair bit to Richard Levins, the great Marxist biologist, who was a good friend, teacher, and student, who over several years moved from developing the architecture of ecological agriculture to working with me on the architecture of the humanities transition from capitalism to socialism. And maybe let me backtrack to a short introduction. This week marks the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution. In my opinion, the greatest step forward in the entire history of humanity. Well, 3 years ago, 101 official, quote unquote, communist parties, the ones in the Solidarity Network, converged on Moscow and Leningrad to mark the 100th anniversary of the revolution. And then a few months later, 71 communist parties met in China, Shenzhen, at the invitation of the Communist Party of China to mark the 200th anniversary of Marx's birth. And something I'd point out is that despite the fall of the Soviet Union, despite counter-revolution in the Soviet Union, the communist parties at these two meetings between them have today have actually more than 105 million members, and the unions either directly affiliated with the communist parties or that unmistakably look to communist parties, the official communist parties. These unions have a combined membership of over 415 million members. Naturally, that doesn't mean that much if that's not mobilized to achieve what is necessary, but nevertheless extraordinary considering Soviet Union fell as it did. A little bit about me, as Yusuf said, in the CP in the USA, Center for Marxist Education. I was born in Palestine in war, driven out in 1948 in war, onto Gaza in war, onto Egypt in war, the Suez War, onto Lebanon in civil war. You get the idea. But one thing you learn is that the world is very changeable. We understand it can change either way, but the world is changeable. In any case, by the time I was 5 years old, I somehow had learned that the communist, quote unquote, Soviet Union had supported forming the Israeli state and in fact helped arm it. And I knew then and know now that this was a crime. But by 20 years later, I had learned that that Lenin and the Communist International had been absolutely opposed to the creation of an Israeli state, and might show a slide about that later. 40 years later, I realized the implications of the Soviet Union supporting the formation of the Israeli state. 50 years later, I received an unexpected invitation to speak in China. Almost 30 visits have followed, largely focused on identifying and addressing Soviet weaknesses to avoid repeats and to advance a transition from capitalism to socialism. And it took 70 years to get to this presentation, so you get the idea. I'm slow. Let me move to is a little bit of guidance from Richard Levins. Hopefully it shows up on the screen. Contrary to common sense, big problems are often more soluble than small ones. So Richard Levins is a great Marxist biologist, died 4 years ago, a little more than 4 years ago. And as I mentioned, an architect of ecological agriculture in Cuba. And by the way, a fourth generation Red. And wow, did it show up in his understanding. And the big problem that the working class faces is advancing and completing the transition from capitalism to socialism, which summarizes the transition, the common interests of the entire proletariat, independent of all nationality, what distinguishes a communist party. The transition, as I mentioned, though, has stalled now for 40 years, since really the victory in Vietnam and revolution in Laos and brief lived in Campuchia. If we fail in advancing the transition, capitalism will destroy the social and environmental foundation for human existence. It's not simply unwilling to stop the destruction, it's materially incapable of doing so. And I've done some work on that, which Richard Levins really liked and contributed to. To stop and reverse the destruction, the working class must take power. So the second quote from Richard Levins that's helpful for today: things are the way they are because they got that way. So it may seem like there's nothing to it, but to understand the phenomenon, we need to know its history and the opposing forces that shaped it. And that includes the entire history behind the sudden fall of the Soviet Union. Hopefully, the analysis today can help place other explanations in a global class historical materialist perspective. And there have been some remarkable work done. And one example, very thorough research, although I do not agree with its basic thesis, but the very thorough research in Socialism Betrayed. But read it, I think, with the analysis presented today, and it fills out the extraordinary work in Socialism Betrayed. And there's been other really insightful work done. So the basic principles I follow with this presentation, with the work in China, Vietnam, Cuba, so on, essentially confidence in the working class, its capacity to lead all oppressed in the transition, confidence in Marxism as the revolutionary philosophy consistent with labor's interests, confidence in the Communist Party, its capacity to face the truth and correct errors, confidence in working class rule, and no confidence in the capitalist class and its system. So so some key points. The necessary starting point for today's analysis is that of a single world economy and now society. Really, since the rise of the web, effectively, there's one world society. The communication back and forth is simply too rapid, and as a result of the rise of a single world economy, we have global class struggle. One class or the other must rule. Let me see if I can get to, I have a diagram used mainly, here's a diagram on the single world economy. Since 1917, since the creation of the Soviet Union, and to this day, the single world economy has consisted of two social systems which are regulated by different laws and which interact and conflict within a single world economy. And my initial invitation to China was a result actually of an article in the People's World, the newspaper of the Communist Party in the United States, that was addressing reasons for the relative stability in the United States. And it was a problem that Marxists had been struggling with. And the only way really to understand it is that the system created by socialist revolutions, fundamentally non-cyclical, has helped stabilize the world economy, while capitalism, with its growing contradictions, destabilizes the whole, including the states formed by socialist revolutions. And that entered into analysis of the strains and stresses that combined with weaknesses that I'm addressing today of the Soviet Union and of the world labor movement that ultimately led to the fall of the Soviet Union and 11 other states, Albania, Yugoslavia, Poland. So in any event, that's a fundamental starting point shown on your screen today, and been very helpful in terms of discussions in China, Vietnam, Cuba, and here. So,
so Wadi,
yes.
this is Sandeep. So can you explain that MC, this circular diagram that you have? In particular, the arrows were of different sizes, different numbers. What exactly do you mean by that?
Right. So this is taking from Marx's work, the cycle, the capitalist cycle, where we're talking money, commodities, imbalances in capitalist economies, in any system essentially of commodity production that's regulated by the law of value, by really commodity production and exchange. Is any system, and above all capitalism, is unable to maintain the necessary balance effectively between ever-changing production and the income and demand of both consumers and producers. And so the arrows break down as these imbalances develop, and as a result, capitalism has never been able to escape crisis. Remarkable work then, above all by Bukharin and Preobrazhensky, but especially Preobrazhensky, helped clarify that under a monopolized system that capitalism has become, effectively any new demand can at least prevent the circulation system from breaking down completely. And that new demand was coming from the non-cyclical states formed by socialist revolutions. And so that was a real key to breaking the secret of the seemingly prolonged period from 1945 into the 1980s and 90s without massive crisis. However, at the same time, we know from Marx that the contradictions of capitalism develop with the growth in the productive forces. And even though the non-cyclical economies prevented the circulation system from breaking down, the contradictions kept growing and growing. By the 1970s, effectively, you have very severe problems building up in the world capitalist system and breakdowns, and the pressures then, not least on the Soviet Union, escalate furthermore into the 1980s. But that's what those broken arrows are. They reflect that inability of the capitalist system to maintain that balance between production and the income and demand of producers and consumers. So hopefully that's a very quick answer. So Marx and Engels understood that the rise of a single world economy spelled global class struggle. That's the starting point, effectively, in all of the work that I've been doing. And their summary is: workers of the world, unite. Note that Marx and Engels did not say workers and oppressed of the world unite. And when they first raised the call for workers of the world unite, workers were a really tiny minority. workers remain a minority in capitalist countries. Marx and Engels, of course, were acutely aware that the great majority of the population were oppressed, but not workers. For example, peasants, urban small producers, and so on. But workers of the world unite. And so Marx and Marxists understood that different classes cannot be united. However, the alliance of workers and oppressed is absolutely essential for the victory of the socialist revolutions. And hence our central symbol is hammer and sickle. And that's a general call, essentially, for the alliance of workers and oppressed that was so crucial for the victory of the Russian Revolution and every revolution since, including China's. I'll get back to that in a second. Just one other point of importance. Notice that the Communist Manifesto is formally the manifesto of the Communist Party, not parties. Party, singular. One party worldwide. And again, this was no mistake by Marx and Engels, and it's continued when the Communist International is formed. Of immense importance, again, in the global class struggle, the states formed by socialist revolutions have fundamentally the same interests as workers and their organizations in capitalist countries, and vice versa. So can often be missed, or we can separate these states, and essentially bourgeois analysis tends to lead us to relative separation of these states, or they actively move to prevent the unity of the workers of the world, and to try to separate the states from the working class in capitalist countries. So still more, oppressed classes have a crucial common interest in the struggle against capitalist rule, but their interests are not identical to those of workers. The other classes are essentially, the term I sometimes use, property tied. Left to themselves, effectively, they understandably will try to expand their property. In other words, their capacity to exploit. However, working class leadership can liberate them from that tie, which can be absolutely imprisoning, and which we also know prevents humanity to move into social and environmental sustainability. So, and then again, only the working class has the interest to take the class struggle to its conclusion, the seizure of power and completing the transition towards socialism. So still more of great importance for this analysis of the Soviet fall. After socialist revolution, government and the state are not identical. This we often tend to equate them, but the state after socialist revolution is the totality of organizations necessary to defend and build the new social system, as well as the relationships between these organizations and world working class organizations. And together, those relationships seek to make the best out of a bad situation. But to identify government and state is a major error, and one that contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union. So Now, among the necessary organizations after socialist revolution are government, the party, unions, youth, equality organizations, for example, equality for women, for nations, nationalities, environmental and health organizations, and others. And again, of great importance are the mechanisms to resolve contradictions between those necessary organizations and their tasks, and those contradictions are real. So the two main tasks of the government after socialist revolution are to organize defense of the new state and reconstruction of the economy. And both tasks require involvement by those non-proletarian property attached classes that form the great majority. Mind you, the government's job after socialist revolution is not advancing the transition from capitalism to socialism. It's not word revolution. Just as it's not the job of labor unions in capitalist countries to lead revolution. That's not what they're built for. That's the job of the party. But nevertheless, the government's task after socialist revolution is of great importance. We'll get right back to that. But among the necessary organizations after socialist revolution, only two are or should be purely working class, and that's the party and the labor unions. And this means that the party and the unions and their relationship is particularly central to advancing working class interests. With the government, again, an extremely important task, get back to it. One thing we don't want is for the government to block the interests of revolution. We want its work to be as consistent as possible with the advance, essentially, of the transition. Just as with labor unions in capitalist countries, we do not want them to block the struggle for revolution, as they've done all too often. In the United States, it stands out. But to get back to this question of state and government, at the end of a long day of discussion, I think in 1920, Lenin called the Soviet Union a workers' and peasants' state. And party members were so advanced theoretically that they went into rebellion. They objected immediately. And when the meeting resumed the next morning, Lenin starts by saying, "Comrades, I made a mistake yesterday. We have a workers' and peasants' government, but ours is a worker state." And again, this enters into understanding the fall of the Soviet Union. So one of the most insightful assessments of the fall of the Soviet Union that I've heard was made by a delegate. There was a Congress of Communist Parties from former Soviet republics in 1997, 6 years after the fall. Our then head of a labor commission, Scott Marshall, attended and reported this. What the delegate said is, when we called the Soviet Union socialist, we disarmed the working class. What a summary. So the fundamental responsibility of a Communist Party does not change after revolution. It's the same before and after revolution. Namely, I'm quoting from the manifesto, to point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independent of nationality, and to always and everywhere represent the interests of a movement as a whole. So, and again, this enters into the analysis that's going to follow. So, um, um, so now let's move to the sequence of events starting November 7th, 1917, that led to the Soviet fall 74 years later. In January 1917, the Bolshevik Party was tiny. I think the most accurate count was 8,000 active members. This is the year it took power. A high-end count, I think from Fred Halliday, 24,000 members. So still absolutely tiny. By November, it's in power. And starting November 7, 1917, the two absolutely essential immediate tasks were first to organize defense of the new state and to carry out land reform and reconstruction of the economy. And these are government tasks. If you fail in organizing that defense, the state will be overthrown by the domestic and international exploiters. Fail on the governing tasks, not least, again, land reform and reconstruction of the economy, and we get overthrown, and it's in a much more cruel way, in a sense, because we'll get overthrown by our own base, workers and peasants, who now expect land, who now expect bread to eat. Before revolution, and this includes in the United States today, a substantial portion of the population does not expect to eat. We're reading reports every day almost these days of people in the United States hit hard by the pandemic and the crisis that it triggered. And you hear, again, people skipping meals, people sometimes going 2 or 3 days without eating. But that's all too common across the capitalist world. But after revolution, the masses now expect to eat. And if we fail on that count, expect to eat not only today, but tomorrow. And if we fail on the count, our own social base will overthrow us. So again, the two immediate tasks of government require extensive defense and reorganization, require that extensive involvement by the overwhelming majority of the property-tied oppressed. In fact, building the new army, the Red Army, immediately after the revolution, required the involvement of officers from the Tsarist army. But they alone had the military skills. And to do this successfully, of course, the Bolshevik Party had to be involved. Where I'm going with this is the indications are that the Bolshevik Party was absorbed by these two life or death government tasks, and ultimately consumed that overwhelming majority of Russia. Again, these are property attached classes, and in turn, these classes joined the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union effectively became government under the conditions that I just cited. So now, to be sure, Lenin in particular tried to keep the party alive, above all by organizing the Communist International, March 1919. But Lenin barely lives 6 years after the revolution, and a good bit of that time is spent recovering from an assassination attempt and severe illness. And he himself, of course, had to be deeply involved in um, uh, 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 government tasks. But in effect, after Lenin's death, Soviet leaders became consumed trying to solve 1,000 small problems, and in the process, lose focus on solving the big one. So these are party leaders, but they get absorbed into those government tasks. But one way to think of it is imagine generals making millions of decisions, fighting battle after battle without consciousness of the actual war that's being fought out, which is the global class struggle, and how to win that war, which is advancing the transition from capitalism to socialism. So, briefly then, a quick summary of factors in the fall of the Soviet Union. First, the small Bolshevik party was absorbed by government tasks. The Communist Party existed in name, but in reality, the party presence gradually declines in the Soviet Union, and it's replaced by government. The second is that the world communist movement was not up to is essentially the necessary tasks that follow. In part, it was understandably blinded by 1917, that extraordinary transition that took place. And in part, it was too weak, theoretically and organizationally, with the one possible exception, I think. Historians today or another day may be able to fill this out, but probably the only exception was Germany, in terms of having the theoretical and organizational strength to keep the Communist Party, meaning the word party, going. As we know, revolution broke out in Germany in 1919. Two top leaders are murdered that year, and the revolution is effectively defeated in 1923. Let me move quickly to two tests of a test of this analysis before getting back to China. The future of humanity will be written in China, but here are two tests of this analysis. There are serious errors, and we don't want to commit serious errors, as Lenin pointed out. There are serious errors by the Soviet and World Communist Party. And one is Palestine, the other joining the United Nations. So both contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union. In 1945, the Soviet leadership agreed to join the United States initiated United Nations. That land stands, by the way, in New York, is donated by the Rockefellers. And I'm so happy to see that Lawrence Shoup is on this because I learned so much from his work on the Council on Foreign Relations, and really critical work in terms of understanding the US ruling class. So in 1945, the Soviet leadership also agreed to support the creation of the Israeli state. And I mentioned earlier, by maybe age 25, I had learned that Lenin and the Comintern were dead set against creation of an Israeli state and Zionism. So the illustration, hopefully on your screen, it's from the Communist International magazine, November 1937. you see the headline, "Against the British Plan to Divide Palestine." In his famous letter to American workers, 1918, Lenin mentions Palestine twice in a letter to American workers, but and he mentions Mesopotamia, Iraq, once or twice as well. In any event, but part of it is warning what Britain is up to and warning essentially the world movement not to get caught in the trap that imperialism was setting. By the way, the Balfour Declaration, Britain's call to form an Israeli state, dates from November 1917, if that month and year mean anything. So, there are a lot of well-read comrades and friends. Oh boy, did I lose something? Yes. Oh yes. Oh, I'm on an abbreviated PowerPoint. With the United Nations, saying there are many comrades and friends who are well read, but essentially the true slogan, never mentioned, of the United Nations is "Oppressors and oppressed of the world unite." So I've tried to read, I don't know, the 100,000 pages of Marx and Engels' true collected works, the mega collection. I'm only kidding about that. But so far, nowhere you'll find "oppressors of and oppressed of the world unite." Of course, it's not there. So now it'd be understandable for the Soviet government to join a bourgeois-dominated international body, for example, for coordination of air travel. But there's no Marxist basis for a Communist Party to unite, quote unquote, with exploiters. That's an exploiter's trap. So this, take the second error. The support for creation of the Israeli state not only violated Leninist policy on the right of oppressed nations to self-determination, it meant that communists were now supporting taking land from the tiller. In other words, tearing the sickle from the hammer. And that has been devastating to the communist movement, not only in the Middle East, but far beyond, across Africa and on. And the right to self-determination and this land question remain absolutely crucial for the advance of the transition. And so that Soviet error is carried far, and it has not been corrected to this date. And believe me, it contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union and in general, the absence or defeat of revolutions. And there have been many attempts at revolution, weakened the Soviet Union massively in advance of 1991. So a big point is that communist support in the United States to the United States, communist support to the United States in World War II implied that US imperialism could somehow serve labor's interests. And the Soviet leadership came to believe this. Hence its support for those US-led initiatives I just mentioned, creating the UN, forming the Israeli state. Note that Ho Chi Minh, for example, Ho Chi Minh drew from the Vietnam's constitution, takes from the US colonial settlers and slave owners constitution. So not only the Soviets, but many other parties had illusions about the US after with communist support to the United States in World War II. So that there was such a support reflect the severe theoretical and in practice the severe weakness of the world movement. It violated the Lenin's principle of conduct for communist parties in imperialist countries at war. Our responsibility at war is to direct our first responsibility, and this is a principle, not a strategy, not a tactic. Our first, for those of us living in imperialist countries, our responsibility is to direct our fire at our own bourgeoisie. So, and errors like this combined Soviet leadership and of the world movement, whether in practice or passively, contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union. So, so these are two tests of the analysis that I'm presenting. Let's turn to China. Okay. In a few months, the Communist Party in China will celebrate its 100th anniversary. So organized in 1921. By 1925, the Communist Party was experiencing explosive growth, as were labor unions in China, Shanghai in particular, but mass movements, above all for land reform, across China. So there's reason to believe that China in the mid-1920s was in a revolutionary situation. And of course, to turn revolutionary situation to revolution requires that leadership, communist leadership. And it was time for workers and peasants to, quote, win the battle for democracy. It was time effectively to advance those struggles by workers and peasants and take it again, win the battle for democracy. The Soviet government, however, through the International, counseled the Communist Party of China to place confidence in the bourgeois nationalist Kuomintang, now housed in Taiwan. And this dealt the CPC and the unions a crushing defeat. That's 1927. So 1927 is it's an early test of the analysis that I'm presenting today, that on the one hand, the great Bolshevik party got absorbed in necessary government tasks, and that effectively the world communist movement had to be strengthened immensely in terms of theory and practice. So fortunately, the defeat forced the Communist Party of China to learn to think. Most CPs that hadn't suffered such a defeat generally continued to follow Soviet government direction. But Chinese histories sum up a key lesson from 1927. The defeat taught the party the necessity, quote unquote, I'm quoting, the necessity for independence. And there's a very important positive interpretation that was crucial for the victory of the Chinese Revolution. It meant independence from the Kuomintang, independence from the bourgeoisie. There is a negative side to the formulation, which is independence from the world communist movement. Because again, after all, the Comintern had effectively set the stage for defeat by following Soviet government direction. So in a broad sense, basically, it can be said that essentially the center of development of Marxism, probably with 1927, if not earlier. The center of development of Marxism moves east to Asia, to India, to China, to Vietnam, to Korea, and nearby states. Essentially, again, after the Soviet Party got absorbed by government and after the defeat of revolution in Germany. And you see the Communist Party in China developing Marxism and applying it, leading to that remarkable recovery from the 1927 defeat and on to the Great Revolution of 1949. So let me move towards the end, which is 5 major differences between the Chinese and Russian revolutions. So as most of you probably know, China's November 7, 1917 arrives October 1, 1949. That's the day of the transfer of power from one class to another. So one big difference with the Russian Revolution is that the Communist Party of China, as far as I can tell, had around 1 million members at the start of 1949, compared to the 8,000 members that the Bolsheviks had in 1917, or 24,000. I mean, the numbers are, I mean, it's on a qualitative different level. A second difference is that the civil war in China was largely concluded before victory, whereas in Russia, the civil war follows the victory of the revolution. So in China, 1949, the Communist Party had a large and battle-hardened army, as we saw when the United States, through the United Nations, we might mention, effectively attacked revolution in Asia with the aggression in Korea. So by comparison, in Russia, the army had to be built from scratch, starting the day of a revolution. Amazing, really extraordinary that the Soviet Union survived 74 years. Another difference is significant amount of land reform and reorganization of government, especially at the village level, was carried out in China before October 1, 1949. In Russia, this government work essentially had to start after November 7, 1917. And believe me, that work is daunting. If those of us living in capitalist countries think that revolution is difficult, after revolution, it becomes 1,000 times more complicated. To be sure, we have much greater resources. We have experience from other revolutions, maybe help from other from states formed by socialist revolution, but nevertheless, it's fantastically more complicated. And again, in Russia, they scrambling to try to figure out how to organize the new state, and and then the Chinese Revolution, one had the precedent of November 1917. Not to mention victories in Albania, in Yugoslavia, in Vietnam, that's August 45, in Korea, September 48, and they had help from the Soviet Union, which extends after October 1, 1949, and was crucial to the process of reconstruction in the decade after 1949. And then finally, Mao lives more than 25 years after the victory of the Chinese Revolution, compared to Lenin's 6 injury and sickness-plagued years. Like Lenin, Mao moved hard to rebuild conscious international communist unity and to work on the momentum of the revolutions that had just taken place. Again, Korea, Vietnam, right next door, China, um, and to advance socialist revolution wherever possible. And some Communist Party of China assessments that I've seen are today are that Mao effectively placed too much of an emphasis on the big problem and too little on governing tasks. So Soviet leaders, so the Chinese party turned again and again to the Soviet Union, to the Soviet leadership for help, essentially to rebuild international communist unity. And the efforts are genuine, and they're rebuffed again and again by the Soviet leadership, which favored the United Nations. So, and the majority of communist parties worldwide followed the Soviet government, and often that led to many splits within the communist movement because of the importance of the Chinese victory. However, it added to the disunity and in many ways confusion in the world movement. So eventually, the Communist Party of China, like the Yugoslav communists before them, are left isolated, and they made their own accommodation with imperialism, and many serious errors have followed. So furthermore, effectively, party and government are intertwined in China as in the Soviet Union, but the party side is more evident. But because of the differences I just mentioned between the Chinese and Russian revolutions, effectively, the Chinese party was not entirely absorbed by government tasks, the way that, as I see it, the Soviet party was. It took me actually some years to realize, but the leaders who invited me to China starting 20 years ago, effectively our group are focused on party tasks, on the transition of humanity, rather than on government tasks. They certainly have contributed to government work, as they should. In fact, the first leader to invite me, whose collected works are being published by the state now, was a minister in the Deng Xiaoping years. But I got to know him well enough to know that effectively his complete dedication is to advancing the common interest of the proletariat, regardless of nationality. It's unmistakable. One conclusion is that China and the world working class can be greatly strengthened through relative separation of the party from government, in fact, of party and government, of unions, equality organizations, and so on, with each working hard to carry out its tasks, domestic and international where appropriate, and to strengthen their base. And at the same time, if you're going to have relative separation of the necessary organizations, we need to develop the harmonizing mechanism, for lack of a better word, to resolve contradictions, which are very real between tasks, developing the economy and environment, for example, developing the economy, for example, and equality for women, developing the economy and the inequality between city and countryside, between intellectual and manual labor. And that combination effectively is to make the best out of a bad situation. So a final part on this. One application of this analysis, I don't know if I included it in the slideshow Yes, here it is. It's on your screen. One application of this analysis. A few months ago, sometime this past summer, my hosts in China asked for my assessment of China's response to the pandemic. And part I said, yeah, I mean, it's obvious that China's response is better than the United States. It's hard to do worse. But my reply, the emphasis was recommending the formation of separate working groups, one each for party, for government, unions, environmental, women's, national equality, health organizations, each reaching out to its base for assessment, as well as hiring its own experts in order to assess the policies to date and to work out policy moving forward. I have concerns. Again, China's response, puts the United States to shame. However, I do have concerns that the response by China could yet result effectively in an explosion of forces that could lead to disintegration of China, and we want to avoid that. His second recommendation was that for the Communist Party of China to organize working groups and with other communist parties, for example, from India, Brazil, and the working group would be tasked with answering what would it take to keep the next infectious agent, and there will be one, and another one after that. But what will it take to keep the next infection from causing so much damage? And another working group with other communist parties, what would it take to prevent new wars, regional or global? And the working class has the strength. It is the real superpower. The workers of the world are the real superpower. Organized correctly, the workers of the world can prevent new wars, regional or global, as well as to stop them. So the main thing is workers of the world unite. And that the first step, I learned this from a leader of a Communist Party of China. I kicked myself that I didn't think of it first, but the leader of a Communist Party of China. First step in workers of the world unite is for communist parties of the world to unite. And a few years later, she learned English, came to Boston for periodic US-China labor meetings organized here to add the word consciously. Workers of the world unite. First step is communist parties of the world unite consciously. To do what? To solve the big problem. And that ends it. What's next are diagrams.
Wadi'h, this is Raj.
Yes, yes, let's end.
If you want to go, I just want to say, do it very briefly because we're about 10 minutes past the time when we stop.
Yes. So this diagram effectively shows this great Soviet building, 21% of world production in 1988 compared to 23% for the United States. This huge building is standing on a single column and with a very narrow base to support the column. So, and that column is government, party, unions, equality, and other organizations, all intertwined under the discipline, really, of government. And of course, when the typhoon hits it, and boy, these typhoons were hitting in the 1980s, when the typhoon hits it, the building just comes down. So a model sometimes used that when a hurricane hits a region, afterwards we find some buildings remain standing, others collapse. Why did any building collapse? The typhoon hit it, but how come some other buildings remain standing? So the comparison is with Cuba. For a variety of reasons, the Cuban building standing on 3 columns, still not sufficient. But the government and party in Cuba are intertwined, and that's a real weakness. But the unions, for a variety of reasons, have been able to defend workers against their own state when necessary. Very interesting, and there are historical reasons behind that. And the women's federations, there was some consciousness to this. The separation from party government, in part achieved through policies, both show a very narrow column, the Soviet and Cuban, for currency. Clearly not enough to support a big building, but currency is that important for the new social system. And there was a problem that the Soviet Union was never able to resolve, a meaningful currency and pricing policy. And Cuba has not, and it's struggling with this problem right now. But and it's something that China has made some progress on. But so let me close and let's move. So who was moderating, Raj?
I am, actually.
Oh, good. Thank you.
If you are finished, then are you finished?
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for a very thought-provoking presentation. What we'll do now is we're going to go to Jean for announcements, followed which we will have a question and comment session. Each person will have 2 minutes. And if you're on the computer, you can, on Zoom, you can raise hand by going to your name in the participants. And I think that gives you an option to raise hand, and then I'll recognize it and I will follow in sequence. And those who are on the phone, I think it is *9 is what is you do to raise hand. I think taking down the hand on phone is going to be difficult, but I think I can do that for them. Or actually Alan will do that. Okay, so with that, also...
Maybe we could stop the share screen too.
Yeah, maybe you can stop the share screen.
Oh,
Wadi'h?
yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And so now what we're going to do is we go to Gene for his announcements, followed by question and answer session. So Gene, please go ahead. Go ahead, Gene. Your microphone is off. Please turn on your microphone. Gene, we can't hear you. Okay, so Alan, can you turn on Gene's microphone?
Yeah, I'm trying to find him in the participants list. So there he is. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Well, anyway, all I have to say is, wow, thank you, Wadi'h. As expected, you're blowing our minds with these ideas, and we really appreciate that. And we're going to continue in just a minute. But before we do, let me just make a few announcements. First of all, if you appreciate this program, please let your friends and enemies know about what we're doing here, so other people can join us and as well. And I just want to say, next week, as you know, the crisis is going to be here full time. And our program will be What Now? This will be the first meeting after the November 3rd election. And all we know is that they will not turn out well. Do we dump Trump or battle Biden? What will groups like Answer, the Poor People's Campaign, and DSA be doing? And we have invited Gloria La Riva, the only socialist presidential candidate on the ballot in 23 states. I think it's actually 15, or her representative. And I would just stress that, she's a socialist. She has been to the socialist countries, Cuba, China, and supports them wholeheartedly, and is the only presidential candidate that does this. So it will be an excellent talk, I think, and we hope you will join us next week. And following that, we have programs on Syria and other things. And to learn more, go to our webpage, icssmarx.org. And also, I'm supposed to say some very convincing things to persuade you to donate to ICSS. And I'll turn it over to Richard Fallenbaum if he's here to give the pitch, since
He's here.
I always give a soft sell, and then people say I should give a hard sell, so I don't do that. Anyway, Richard.
Well, I don't have anything much to add to Gene's thing. I do urge people to contribute to ICSS and the library. There's information on the announcement that you received, and I'll add it to the chat on how you can do it, either through PayPal or the old-fashioned ways. It's very easy. So I urge people to make a contribution. We can certainly use it. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we are going to question and comment part, and the first person with a question or comment is Sharon Rose. Sharon, please go ahead. You need to unmute. Sharon needs to unmute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Wadi'h. This is really thought-provoking and interesting presentation. I just have a couple of comments. So I can't agree with you that the Soviet Union joining the United Nations was a mistake. I don't think they had a choice. They had just lost 30 million people. Their infrastructure was in disarray. The United States has just dropped 2 atomic bombs relatively near to their shores, with a clear threat that represented to the Soviet Union. And I think they were hopeful that the non-aligned movement, I don't know if it was called that back then, but non-aligned countries and newly emerging countries getting independence from colonialism they were hopeful that all those countries would be allies to them in the United Nations, and that they could use the United Nations as a bulwark against Western imperialism. It didn't turn out that way, but I think that it was realistic to think that it might have at the time. The question of Palestine is a different question. That clearly was a mistake, although it was based on some understandable but misguided reasoning. And it was really a very bad mistake. I have to, of course, agree with that. I think that when we talk about what happened eventually to the Soviet Union, we have to look at what they were doing in training their cadre and training their military leadership, which were also cadre. So the officer corps of the Red Army took a pledge to defend socialism. I mean, that's their oath. And where were they in 1989? I still don't understand that. And I think it's worth looking at that. And also, they did lose their best cadre in the Second World War, but they had 45 more years to rebuild that cadre. And I don't think they did a very good job of that, given how few people objected when Gorbachev sold them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And Wadi'h, would you like to respond to individual questions, or you want to collect 2 or 3?
Let me try with this, because this is quite important, and what Sharon is raising is, I think, a widespread understanding, and we almost rarely see, to this day, positive references to the United Nations. So for Palestinians, the United Nations, quote unquote, played quite a role in effectively the crime against Palestine. And so I was immunized against the United Nations as a very little child, and that immunization has not worn off. Because I also had learned that the Soviet Union had supported formation of the Israeli state. I was immunized against the Soviet Union, but that wore off, although it took a couple of decades into my 20s to put it into historical perspective. You're certainly right. I think joining the UN and supporting the formation of the Israeli state was most likely a cost of the Soviet victory in World War II. So one would like to point out that starting in August 1945, but not earlier, the Soviet Union did give major support that proved crucial for the victory, the final victory of the Chinese Revolution. And that's the way forward for humanity, as well as Korean Revolution. And let me raise almost this formulation. The Leninist road to peace is through prosecution of the class struggle. The driver of war, small and large, is capitalism with its deepening contradictions, and that needs to guide us. So, so in some ways, it appears the Soviet leadership gave support to the Chinese Revolution out of fear that if the revolution did not win, the Soviet Union would now face war from the East. They effectively blocked revolution in the West out of fear that if they didn't, they would face war from the West. So there is a logic to what you're raising. But again, let me point out, one of the very first things, besides the crime against Palestine, that the United Nations was a cover for the crime against Palestine. But another first big step of the United Nations was the aggression on revolution in Asia, the aggression on Korea. Really, before that, the use of atomic weapons against Japan was unmistakably aimed at the Soviet Union and revolution in Asia. And delaying the revolution has greatly escalated all kinds of damage to humanity, including through war after war after war. So the United Nations was the cover for attack on Korea, and what's the Soviet Union doing remaining in the United Nations? 1950, 51, 52, 53, and beyond. So again, there's no material basis for oppressors and oppressed unite, exploiters and exploited unite, and the way forward is workers of a world unite, and a delay in that sets a stage for worse and worse wars.
Okay, so we have two people right here in front of me. One is Jean, the other is Michael, Michael K. in Oakland. So Jean, you go first, and after that is Larry Shoup. He raised his hand, and let me just check. So three, Jean, Michael K., and then Larry.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks again, Wadi'h, for this. And, you know, when I first heard your talk, I guess it's almost 10 years ago, I heard when you said, you know, the future of humanity will be written in China. I guess I misunderstood that. I heard that as saying the future of humanity will be written in Chinese. which I agree. And I also think it'll be written in Spanish as well as English. So I just wanted to say that. Also want to say great respect for our comrade Larry. I'm glad he's here because I was persuaded by his work to take out a subscription to Foreign Affairs because we need to know how the ruling class thinks. And they had a recent statement in there. I was struck by one of their leading lights was basically that, you know, for the first time in world history, we have a communist country that is playing a leading role in the world economy. And I found that very enlightening because you know, it means that China has done something very correct if they are playing a leading role in the world economy. This is, as Xi Jinping says, a new era for humanity because you know, communists are playing this leading role. And I just also wanted to say that, you know, I think most of us would agree that Marx, Engels, and Lenin are all in their own category for most of us Marxists. But I put, you know, the leading lights after that, Stalin, who took a correct stance, you know, after the Civil War and everything else. He led the Soviet Union to victory in World War II, defeat over fascism, which is very important. And again, when the crisis hit and, you know, the Soviet Union was overthrown in 1991, one of the early steps was the counter-revolutionary group Solidarity. And they won an election on June 4th, 1989. And that was the very day that Deng Xiaoping took the correct action and repressed the counter-revolutionaries who had been mobilizing in Tiananmen Square. So I think that's crucial about understanding this. And then Deng Xiaoping has also been playing a leading role. And a lot of people disagree with me, but I put Deng Xiaoping in the same category as Stalin, as a great leader of the socialist movement. But I am past my time. Thank you.
Okay. Wadi'h, do you want to respond to this or take another question before you respond to two?
Let's try another. And,
okay, Michael?
If I can't handle both, I'll try to deal with one at a time.
Okay, that's fine. You can do one at a time, it's no problem. If you want to go one at a time, you can respond to Jean.
Who's next? Is it?
Michael K. Michael Kaufman, I think, if I'm not mistaken. He's in Oakland.
Love Oakland.
Okay, Michael, go ahead. Please unmute yourself, Michael. Can't hear you. Alan, do you have to unmute him?
No, I've asked.
Okay. Okay, Michael, I think you're okay now.
Thank you. I was very intrigued with different needs and organizations.
Do you have two?
I think you have, there you go.
Oh, okay.
And turn off your video, there you go. Oh.
Why don't we go to somebody else? Let's go to Larry and then come back to Michael a little later.
Okay.
He was intrigued by your, I forgot his question, but anyway, let's, do you want to answer Jean in first?
Can I finish my question?
Yes, you can. We couldn't hear you earlier.
I'm sorry, there were technical difficulties.
Yes,
the combination of the party and the government caused many problems in terms of your analysis. I'm wondering whether, and you said that the unions are now separated from the government and the party in Cuba, and the women's organizations are separated. and that has been a benefit to the society in Cuba. But this combination of organizations for a single purpose is sometimes necessary. I'm wondering whether you, what your position is on the role of the Communist Party of the United States during World War II, when it insisted that unions stop striking against their bosses in order to allow the US to prosecute the war more easily during World War II. Should that no strike pledge have been done or not during World War II? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, Raj.
Let me
Okay, so Wadi, go ahead.
let
Respond to
me
these two.
try dealing quickly first with what Michael raised. Important point. It's a relative separation in
Can you
Cuba.
speak up a little bit volume-wise?
Yes, relative separation of the necessary organizations. Um, so the relative is important, again, combined with mechanisms to resolve differences among the tasks and among the organizations. Not easy, but there's contradictions between tasks are very real. And again, at the end of the day, all we can do is make the best out of a bad situation. If the unions are excluded from making the best out of a bad situation, or the women's organizations, or the environmental, effectively at the end of the day, because we still have a bad situation, if we're excluded from it, we're going to blame the leadership that left us with a bad situation. If we're included in it, one, it's more likely that a better solution to the problems we face will be achieved, but also we will have been part of making the best out of a bad situation. So that relative separation and those mechanisms that are quite important. In terms of World War II, absolutely essential to defend the Soviet Union using working class means. Oakland is famous in terms of the Longshore Union, and Harry Bridges, and that history. So, for example, to block the continuing shipments of oil and other goods that allowed Germany and Japan to fight their wars well into World War II. For banking workers to expose what the US financial system was doing in facilitating, again, the German and war against the Soviet Union, and Japan's war, not least against the Chinese Revolution and its crimes. So, but absolutely, again, the big criminal is imperialism, and the Leninist direction, in my opinion, remains valid. So not easy, has to be faced. This is a major question that afflicts us to this day. So with what Jean raised, and boy, I do agree about Larry Shup's contributions and the importance of seeing, I sometimes call the Council on Foreign Relations the central committee of the US ruling class, which is exceedingly small, but in crisis. and the crisis now means that work like Larry Shoup did on what's going on within the Council on Foreign Relations and within the ruling class is of great importance. Um, so, and Jean, I hope when you heard that the future of humanity would be written in Chinese, that you started learning Chinese. But in terms of Mao, in terms of Stalin, in terms of Deng Xiaoping, so uh, uh, especially with Mao and Stalin, both coming under attack from the right. So one of the contributions of Grover Furr, and one reason that I had him come to China is because effectively, like Khrushchev's attacks on Stalin were from the right, and almost litmus test for me is that opposition to Stalin or Mao that's coming from the right. But again, the tasks after a revolution are overwhelming, that Stalin withstood the fantastic pressures, fantastic in terms of an achievement, but they did come at an enormous cost domestically and internationally. And I think that included, say, what happened in China in 1927. And I've tried to put it in a historical perspective, how it could happen, and with Palestine and with the United Nations, and quite a bit. And the same Mao made some serious errors, and you need to address them within that framework of trying to build the new social system. Fantastically difficult. It so happens, and I think I mentioned my first host in China was a minister in the Deng Xiaoping period, I think Minister of Information. He and Deng Xiaoping worked together to form the Academy of Marxism, initially the Institute of Marxism. That has been effectively one center of maintaining party tasks. So again, a tremendous achievement, but wow, have they come at a cost. And I've mentioned in China initially to my first host in terms of that while the main work that I was doing, this is very early on, was on developments in the world political economy with two social systems interacting and conflicting, and the impact of that on both systems, that in some ways I considered my most important work was correcting errors in the party here. Silence follows, and then through the interpreter, my host says, our friendship has just deepened. And then what follows, this is from a minister in the Deng Xiaoping period, is quite a listing of errors done in the Deng Xiaoping period. For example, in Africa. So I want to emphasize, again, Communist Party can face the truth and correct its error. And considering both the membership of communist parties, whose main reference points are above all the Russian and Chinese revolutions, but not least the number of workers in affiliated unions, effectively really the initiative or failure of initiatives by CPs will be the do or die for humanity. This is where the central struggles for the future of humanity will take place. And the dominant party among those of necessity, but also because of its extraordinary organization, is the Communist Party of China. absolutely extraordinary in terms of organization and discipline and the internal discussion that's possible because of that extraordinary organization. However, how it's used, how China's strength is used, that's not settled. And the great achievements under Deng Xiaoping and in the years since have come at a great cost. And let me mention one of great concern is the tremendous rise of small businesses in China. I think it's my interpreter in my last trip about 9-10 months ago, just before the pandemic, I asked her 113 million businesses in China. And in part, as the work in Socialism and Trade has pointed out, basically the interests of property owners, including small businesses, is to get larger. And the stress of the government, and that does follow from the market changes and opening up in China under Deng Xiaoping, the stress of government has been encouraging business. And that has happened with the pandemic. The pandemic did cause quite a bit of damage in China. And the government is putting stress on supporting business. The party needs to defend the interests of workers. And the interests of business can come at the, and often does come at the expense of the working class and unions. So there is an unemployment in rise in China. The response to encourage laid off workers to open up their own businesses, and for youth unable to find work to open up their own businesses. Another possibility coming from the party and the unions, for example, is to reduce the work week and hire more workers. And that will come against resistance from business owners. So, so that's why that quote, when we call the Soviet Union socialist, we disarmed the working class. It's so important to arm the working class, and party and government are intertwined in China, but the party presence, as far as I can tell, is significantly stronger and more conscious, in part for the reasons I mentioned, than, to me anyway, evident in the Soviet Union. So.
Okay, thanks. We'll go to Larry Shoup, followed by Richard Fallenbaum. And Bonnie has a question. Bonnie, if she's not able to ask, Alan will ask the question. She put her question in the chat. So between Bonnie and so the first one is then Larry Shoup. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, Wadi'h, first I want to thank you very much for mentioning my work on the American ruling class in the Council on Foreign Relations. You know, as an author, you write books and you get maybe a few reviews and make some speeches, and then it's all gone. You don't hear anything more. So it's wonderful that you mentioned that you found it valuable. The mainstream media, of course, doesn't cover our work very much, so we don't hear that. So I very much appreciate you mentioning it, that it was valuable to you. On your talk, I think it was an excellent strategic perspective that's very useful for the entire left in the entire world to pay heed to. So I really appreciated your talk. Also, I do have a minor disagreement, though, I think, on Cuba. I've done some study of Cuba, and it's a very democratic society, and they try to consult constantly with the people in various ways, many different ways. And it's not just the unions are independent or the women's movement's independent. They have student groups that are independent. They have the Farmers Confederation. They have, even in the armed forces, they have a confederation of officers and the rank and file. So they're constantly consulting with the people. And the party, while it's linked to the government, it's really in many ways independent of the government. The people elect their leaders through local assemblies and then a real complicated electoral system, but it's very democratic. And then they also, like I say, consult for various things. When there's something important, they'll consult with millions of Cubans they'll have 100,000 meetings around the island to discuss something of importance and relevance. And what the people say counts. They try to stay very close to the people. And that's why they survived, I believe. When other countries collapsed, Cuba survived because they're so close to the rank and file, and they're such a democratic society in so many ways. But anyway, overall, that's a kind of minor point that I would disagree with. It wasn't just the unions and the Women's Federation, it was all these other things. And there's some distance between the party and the state, I think, in Cuba. Obviously important links as well. So, but anyway, I really appreciate your talk and thank you for making it today.
And we go to another question, another comment from Richard Fallenbaum first. Wadi'h?
Oh, in response to Larry?
Yeah.
I've brought your books to China more than once, and their importance. Among the few books right by the side of my desk are two books, Lawrence Shoup and William Minter, going back 40-some years, and Lawrence Shoup, Wall Street's think tank. And for Marxism, understanding of the ruling class and its concentration is of enormous importance. And I actually have a diagram on control. It's called Control of Capital and the U.S. state apparatus. And I would like to email it to you, Larry, for your assessment. So if we can connect, that'd be
Lawrence
very
Shoup at
helpful.
Gmail. Lawrence Shoup at Gmail. My name at gmail.com.
Yep, I understood. Yep.
And one thing I forgot to forget is the council now is doing a strategic review of the grand strategy, U.S. grand strategy in regard to China. They're doing a strategic review now, and they've been doing it for a number of years. I wrote an article for Month Review in September of 1915. It came out. But they're continuing that grand strategy. I have some new papers out this year on U.S. grand strategy towards China that we should be paying attention to, and I'm going to be writing something more on that soon that Month Review may carry. So that's just an update to people that the CFR is thinking about a new grand strategy towards China.
Yep, and I believe me, I read your article on grand strategy that was in Monthly Review a few years ago. I agree with what you raised in terms of essentially democracy and really the culture in Cuba. It is remarkable. Cuba's small size helps. China has 123 times the population of Cuba. The complexity of a place, anybody who tells you they know China, it's impossible. But the intertwining of government and party is an issue in Cuba and discussed there, again, because of a different role. And that has shown up, in my opinion, for example, in relationship to policy towards Nicaragua, towards Venezuela, both of which are still capitalist, in terms of, again, that laser focus on advancing the transition. Nicaragua, the working class was in a position to take power in 1979. And actually, I ached because in some ways, the Cuban government, that party government intertwined, held that back, and that's come at immense cost. And in Venezuela, again, Venezuela is still capitalist and unable to solve problems that little Cuba has solved. Never mind what China or Vietnam have solved. So, so again, that laser focus, that obsession, catching the viral infection where we get obsessed with advancing the transition. And so now Cuba has held back, and part of it, as I see it anyway, is again that intertwining of party and government. But nevertheless, if or maybe I'll send you some of these diagrams. Part of the diagram on Cuba emphasizes that greater base of the building, that greater connection with the masses, but it's not enough. I think
it should be more, but it's enough to serve. They've survived.
Yes, but they were
Revolution's
damaged.
still going.
They were damaged by obviously the fall of the Soviet Union and so on. They're still in danger. For example, for some years, maybe that has changed. The women's federations meetings they lost their vitality. Again, maybe that has changed.
Very good discussion, but I think we should move on from this topic, if you will permit me to, because there are people waiting. So I'll go to Richard Follenbaum, followed by Elazar, and then Norma. These are the three next people in line. So go ahead, Richard. Please unmute yourself. Somebody has to unmute you. Alan, could you unmute Richard? Richard, can you unmute yourself now?
No. Okay, here I am. Well, I disagree on the question of the United Nations. I think it was a great achievement that the Soviet Union joined the United Nations. I think it was a strategic move, particularly with the veto, the veto in the Security Council, which has been, except for the question of Korea, which I don't quite know why the Soviet Union was not didn't use the veto then, but it's been important for quite a while, even up to most recently, in restraining imperialism. Not, of course, something like the United Nations can't completely restrain imperialism, but it had an impact. And I don't think the Soviet government had any more expectations than that. And it's also an arena for class struggle, which has been carried on within that organization, just like bourgeois parliaments are and so forth. But I want to ask a question about the current Russian government and how you would evaluate it. There's a really very close relationship between Russia and China now. I think it's more than a strategic relationship, and it's a warm relationship, if you like. And I wonder how you would, in that context, you would evaluate the Russian government.
Okay, you want to answer that, or you take another question?
This can have a very quick response. So with my initial host, this was maybe 12 or 13 years ago, there's a Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the two key members were China and the Russian Federation. And so my host actually at his house asked me, what do you think of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Clearly looking for approval. And my response was, of course, imperialism means to achieve counter-revolution and to bring down the Chinese state. And the threat is very real. And for China to tactically form an alliance with the Russian Federation is justified. However, the Russian state is a product of counter-revolution. It's a bourgeois state. So he didn't get the approval he was looking for. But in any case, the meeting ended on a good note and so on. The very next morning, 7 in the morning, phone rings. I'm staying at a guest house. Phone rings. It's the interpreter. Comrade Jin wants to let you know how much he appreciated your response on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Class comes first. And absolutely justified the German-Soviet Pact of 1939. Absolutely justified in providing the Soviet Union with critical time to build up its defenses against the coming war. But, you know, can't prettify it, and we know what came of that. So that's my emphasis. Class comes first, and that includes with states, and don't get caught by surprise. So Putin has said again and again, you know, keeps getting slapped in the face. He would much rather form an alliance with the United States. But for a variety of reasons, the United States is using Russia, you know, in part to destabilize China. So, but that's
Okay,
enough.
so Elazar, you're next.
Raja Bonnie's had one.
I'm
for
sorry.
a while.
Bonnie?
Am I
Real
on?
quick one.
Yeah, can
hang
I
on.
speak now?
No, hold on.
Are you ready for my question?
No, Elazar,
Are
hold
you
on.
ready?
Elazar, can you hold?
Okay.
I think Bonnie's ahead of you, Elazar.
Yeah, let me ask Bonnie's question real quick.
Yeah.
Who's ahead of me?
Bonnie, and the question will be
God.
asked by Alan on her behalf.
You want me to mute myself again?
Yeah, or if you're quiet, you can leave it on. You'll come right back on after that. Go
Okay,
ahead.
Bonnie's question is a quick one. Did the Soviet Union ever apologize for the mistake of recognizing the state of Israel and supporting the Zionists?
Not to my knowledge. So this is interesting. From the time I was a child, effectively, you notice that the Soviet leadership would again and again criticize, you know, the absolute disgusting practices of the Israeli state, including carrying out what's very close to 100% segregation, extreme inequality, and so on. So something I certainly noticed from the time I was a child is that when the Soviet leaders were critical of the Israeli state that they had helped form, they were more truthful than the imperialists, but they were not speaking the truth or correcting the error. And part of this analysis is in terms of the critical importance for communist parties to speak the truth. And as Hegel said, the truth is the whole. That when that whole is missing, when the truth is not spoken, that's an index of penetration, of exploitation into the leadership of the working class. And what you'd notice with the Soviet leadership is actually a decay in speaking the truth that got worse into the 70s, 80s, 90s. And boy, can that come to bite us, because we lose credibility. And then when we do speak the truth about capitalism, the masses will not believe us. And that happened. And so one of the preparations done in China was to discuss what happened with Chernobyl, where essentially the world and the Soviet masses learned about Chernobyl from the capitalists, who immensely exaggerated the incident, but it was too late. And actually, some reports are that Soviet leaders stopped believing themselves, never mind the Soviet masses, and that contributed. And I think that in turn affected the much more truthful response of the China's leaders to the pandemic in Wuhan. So, but no, don't know of a correction.
Okay, Alazar,
Are you ready for me now,
Yes,
Raj?
Alazar. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So by now I've accumulated a few points, and if I go on too long, please just stop me.
No, limit
Number
it because
one,
we're really short of time.
can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Anyway, I agree with Wadi'h on the United Nations. It was an imperialist organization. I don't care what the cover was. But let's say now the Soviet Union is in. Richard Fellenbaum raised a crucial point without driving it home. The one really important moment they could have exposed U.S. imperialism's war in Korea, provoked by the phony government the United States created in the south of Korea, was by vetoing the UN action against Korea and exposing it as a U.S. imperialist action. Why they didn't do it, I would like Wadi'h to answer. I've heard all types of questions in interpreting Stalin's position on the Chinese Revolution. I don't want to get my own point of view involved in that. So here, the next question is, someone raised a question of the no strike pledge of the working class in the United States, which again was a grave error because the bosses were profiteering, price gouging, and unmentioned, the biggest capitalists in general were trading with the Nazis all during the war. So here, the working class is taking away its biggest weapon for justice and for helping the Soviet Union by spreading a revolutionary situation in the United States by bosses that were not only collaborating with Nazis, but were profiteering during the war. So I think that was a grave error in calling for that position. And another thing, I think I should finish now because other people are waiting, but I waited a long time. Please address the question. Please address the question of why the Soviet Union couldn't put on hold its little boycott on behalf of Communist China in the UN and veto that's in the Security Council. Thank you.
Okay, let me, before Wadi'h answers that, we also have Norma after that. I would like to extend the session, even though we're past 12:34, if everybody agrees, for 10 minutes, because there are people who want to ask questions. And with everybody's permission, I'll keep recording on as an exception today for 10 more minutes. So Wadi'h, please be brief in your answers so that others
And we also have Yusuf, who's also on the stack.
Yeah, Yusuf is
I
also...
forgot my major question. I think I'm still, I hope I'm muted.
No, you're not muted. Please mute yourself.
In some sense, the big question is, what was the state of the working class doing in an organization of the exploiters? So, but we also have, so I think the reasoning behind the Soviet government underlying that, failing to veto, what they did was to absent. They avoided the vote. They were hoping, they were still had some illusions in U.S. imperialism, and they were still hoping to get aid from the United States. But let's look at the other side of it, which was a tremendous aid that the Soviet state, together with the Chinese state, gave to the working class in Korea, which really led to the first near defeat for U.S. imperialism, sometimes called a stalemate. But the U.S. got rebuffed, and that continued, by the way, in the U.S. aggression in Vietnam, where China and the Soviet Union joined forces to help Vietnam against the U.S. aggression. So there's those two sides, but what a mistake to be there, considering the momentum for revolution in Europe let's not forget not only Greece, but Italy and France, but let's not forget again what was unfolding in Asia. And the delay in revolution has immensely escalated the environmental destruction. More than half of the world's destruction, the poisoning of nature has taken place in the years since World War II, and the immense escalation of the war danger.
Okay, Norma is next, and Gene has raised his hand, but I think we won't have time for Gene because I want to ask a question or make a comment. Norma, please go ahead. Unmute yourself.
I did, yes. Wadi'h, it's good to see you, and Sandra. It's too bad Larry's not here. I wanted to clap him on the back, another person clapping Larry on the back, for talking about the Cuban people being heard by Cuba, by the governance of Cuba. I think that what's happened in Cuba is that given their constant broadcasts of what they were about from the time of their revolution, and of course all the procedures since then, that they are achieving the high goal, the highest goal we have, which is to let the people be changed, to change themselves into the person that has positive things to contribute to what the government does, etc. That is a very positive person towards communism, which is totally the opposite of what's going on in the rest of the world. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I think we're winning in the rest of the world, but not loudly. The other thing is, I do agree with somebody, was it LSR? Somebody said, I agree with Richard Fallenbaum, that's who said that it was good that the USSR, as defunct as it had become, joined the UN. I think it put a dampening effect on nations throughout the world, and also a unifying effect for very small nations.
Okay, so shall I go ahead and ask my question, or you want to respond to that, Wadi'h?
Just quickly, again, extraordinary what Cuba's done, and health extraordinary, but most extraordinary is ecological agriculture. And actually, Sandy got sick. We were in Cuba trying to develop China-Cuba cooperation in ecological agriculture. As I see it, absolutely essential to achieve social and environmental sustainability. And Richard Levins comes into this. However, Cuba can do fantastic things domestically, has done fantastic things domestically, and but as I say,
know what I said at the beginning is the highest achievement is the change of the individual under the opportunity to let themselves be changed, to affirm it, and then all those things proceed from that, I say. And I want to rank them. You started to change my ranking.
And I'd like to infect them with this obsession about the transition and not stopping short.
Right.
So my question to you, I have a number of questions and comments, but there's no time. So I will just go to the most significant one that I have. Last time you were here, you said, and I recall that very clearly, that you said you can no longer categorize China as a socialist country. This was at the library. In fact, David Ewing was really angry with you for having said that. Now, I don't think China has reverted back towards socialism from what I can see. Maybe I'm mistaken. The fact that its party is one thing, but if you go to the root of the very first thing you showed, which is your CMC at MCM diagram, how do you justify that and what China becoming a commodity center from which profit is made and exporting to the whole world, and then you say the future of humanity will be written in China? At least if it is written, it won't be written in socialist ink, you know, if it is written. I don't see it. How do you justify it? Please answer that.
So let's go to another incident in China, what I call my entrance exam to the Central Party School in Beijing. So the deputy director asked me point blank, do you think China is socialist? And by the way, a good part of the faculty is in the room listening in to the entrance exam. And my response was, China is the product of a great socialist revolution, and that remains to this day. But we cannot call the poverty you still find in China, this was 13 or 14 years ago, great reduction in poverty since, we cannot call the continued inequality in China, which was rising, it's declined, some may have risen since the pandemic. We cannot call the continued existence of classes, that's not socialism, but the emphasis is, again, China product to this day of a great socialist revolution, October 1, 1949. So then I turned the table on her and I asked her, oh, I know. She says, I agree. And by the way, a good part of the faculty at the Central Party School, the way they snickered, and that's been confirmed to me, indicated they thought China was now capitalist. So, so same as the Soviet Union, a state created by a socialist revolution. But when we called the Soviet Union socialist, we disarmed the working class. And that's what I was trying to get at. And you remember correctly, and I'm not sure if David misunderstood me. So then she asked me, well, how do you define socialism? I said, I prefer the political definition from Lenin, which is the point at which classes can begin to dissolve, and as a result that the state, that any organized repression can dissolve. And then I turned the table. I said, how do you define it? And she said, I prefer with socialism from each according to their ability to each according to their work, effectively underlining China is still very far from the ability to obtain from each according to their ability. So we're not at socialism yet. And in any case, she was very happy with the answer. And a good part of the faculty, I think, would have liked to throw me out the window.
Thank you very much. With that, we're going to stop.
Wait, Raj Yusuf has had his hand up for a while now.
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. I'm just saying I was going to stop the recording, but let's go to Yusuf first, and then we'll stop the recording.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is about the self-characterization of the Chinese Revolution, and they emphasized that it was a block of 4 classes, actually, and whereas you emphasize the independent, and the block of 4 classes is symbolized in their flag.
Right.
So, they did want to form a united front with a common tongue against the Japanese invasion, but actually the common tongue was so anti-communist that it never really worked out. So could you comment on this and how this fits in with your characterization of the Chinese Revolution?
Right. So probably, certainly among the most class-conscious people I have ever met are in the Chinese Party. And they emphasize the Chinese Revolution was led by the working class. That's the Communist Party, but led by the working class specifically. However, to achieve that revolution required those alliances. But even then, there was some confusion. That block of four classes, which included the patriotic bourgeoisie, the peasantry, and petty bourgeoisie, basically there was still some confusion as to what to carry out. And for 4 years after the revolution, they allowed the patriotic bourgeoisie to retain their factories. And, however, soon enough, the opposition from the bourgeoisie to the new state became evident. And so the nationalizations that took place in Russia starting November 7, 1917, didn't happen in China for four years. So there was still some confusion on that count. But nevertheless, then, that leadership of the Communist Party, if this was a peasant party, or if this was a party of several classes, as opposed to a party of the working class, it would have dropped the name communist. That Communist Party name in itself, but also you look at the reference points for the leadership of the party, and especially after, say, the re-education campaigns that took place in the 1930s, firmly anchoring the Chinese party in Marxism and reference to the Russian Revolution as its model. Again, this is a working class party, but there was confusion. That's going to happen inevitably in struggle. And it's in part the legacy of that Comintern hope expressed in with the Kuomintang. So even though they knew to maintain independence from the Kuomintang, there was still some illusion in this patriotic bourgeoisie. Then it's redeveloped, and potentially, it helped develop the productive forces, but under the monopoly of force and politically of the Communist Party, there has been a resurgence of bourgeois ownership within China. The state is still the state formed by the continuity is unmistakable, but as I pointed out, the dangers from the growth of private business in China is very real. And this pandemic and the earthquakes around the capitalist world, those forces are going to play themselves out. And so that's why that recommendation about the party separately from the government, but together with the unions, but basically that ability, developing so many more columns to hold up the Chinese state and the base, and most important of that base are the workers. So very difficult problem.
Okay, so I have 10 minutes and we'll leave the recording on today. We'll decide later how much to publish. But I have Jean's hands raised, but before we go back to Jean second time, what I wanted to ask those who have not spoken, does anybody else has a question or comment of those who have not spoken? And if they haven't, if I don't see it, then we'll go to Jean. Okay, I don't see any hand so far. So Jean, go ahead. You're next. Unmute yourself. Jean, you're muted. I can't hear you, Jean.
Okay, now am I unmuted?
Yes, you're fine now.
Okay, I want to make a couple of points and actually disagree on a number of points that I think I should, again, come out with. First of all, it was Lenin that called the Soviet Union socialist. on the eve of the revolution, we shall now proceed to the construction of socialism. And he was there when it was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And in the first constitution, the Russian Republic, 1918, he said the Soviet Union is a socialist state under the dictatorship of the proletariat. So this is continued. Well, not in the 1936 Constitution, but always the Union of Soviet Socialist Societies. And that formulation is also true of China, that, they still use that same formulation. China is a socialist state under the democratic dictatorship of the people, led by the working class, which is in essence the dictatorship of the proletariat. And I say that arms the workers, not disarms them. And I also want to, that's point one. Point two is, I think when we look at these countries, people are saying, well, they made mistakes, and so forth. And I think we need to undertake what Rosa Luxemburg said about this. She said, show me the revolution that has not made mistakes. The whole idea that a socialist revolution will not make mistakes is worthy only of the schoolmasters of the Second International, who failed their test, incidentally, on the issue of peace. So I would make this point, I think, again, when I look at what the Soviet Union, China did, there are lots of things that make me very uneasy. Breaking the Iron Ice Bowl, Three Gorges Dam, whole series of things make me and the war with Vietnam, the border war. So there are lots of things that make me uneasy, but when I look at them more carefully, I find it's my fault because I don't understand what they're doing. They do understand that. They have a good control of things and they have a good record. So I just want to come out real strong with a heavy pro-China, pro-Soviet position on this. Thank you.
Wadi'h, your comment, and then we'll see if anybody else has a question.
Well, what a wonderful discussion, and that includes the points that Jean raised. And again, a comment from China, from the president of the Academy of Marxism, who came to visit us in Boston, that it's criminal that the labor unions in China are excluded from making policy. So that's part of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And so again, you can use what China had and what Soviet Union had and what Albania had and Yugoslavia had and Vietnam were socialist revolutions. And we emphasize that, but say excluding the unions from forming policy, again, from the party sided. The people hosting me are party concentrated, are class concentrated. It's criminal to exclude the unions from making policy. So, but you bet mistakes are unavoidable, and what we want to avoid is serious errors, like Clement said, and even then.
Okay, so thank you, Wadi'h. We have one more person, Roger Harris. You're next, please. Unmute yourself and make your comment or question. Roger? Roger, your microphone is off.
Okay, now the host had to unmute me. So thank you very much for that presentation. I learned a lot. And one of the things I try to do when I'm learning is trying to apply the ideas and see how they work. So I understand this notion that different classes can't be united, and particularly the working class with the bourgeoisie. And also that we have to direct our fire at our own bourgeoisie. And you also mentioned the importance of the necessity of independence of communist parties from their own bourgeoisie. So when I think about like how does that apply, I think of now the CPUSA, and it's and I believe the term that's been used is having a united front with Biden to elect a bourgeois president. Do you see that as a contradiction to socialist ideas, or do you see that as a continuation?
A big part of seeing it is with the CPUSA having suffered very severe blows, I think, in good part as a result of the error in World War II that I mentioned. Essentially, it is trying to maintain the connection with the unions and to see that side of the policy. But in my opinion, the United States has entered something of a revolutionary situation where the ruling class could not go on as before, leading in quick succession, 2006, a change in the bankruptcy laws that hammered business owners. Then 2007, the housing crisis that led to several million losing their homes, including business owners. And then 2008, the massive crisis. What followed is, so one, the ruling class could not go on as before. What soon follows, 2009, is the beginning of a rebellion of the social base of the ruling class, the Tea Party. That represents a rebellion of the social base of the ruling class, immensely weakening it. And then starting 2011, not as well expressed, one, the rebellion in Wisconsin, occupation of the state capital, the Occupy movement soon after, then the explosions in the Black liberation movements in the Native American movement, the explosions, the teacher strike in Chicago in 2012, teacher strikes 2018, West Virginia, Arizona, Kentucky, Oklahoma. And so from a historical perspective, we've entered the revolutionary period. The critical element then to turn potential into revolution is the Revolutionary Party. And
so does that mean that you're looking at the Democratic Party as no longer a bourgeois party?
Oh boy, it represents the ruling class. Please ask please ask Larry Shoup and look at that. So I'd like to leave it at that. But the critical thing is to see this historical period and to understand that policy towards the Democratic Party as an effort to maintain a connection with the working class.
But if it were a revolutionary period, would be uniting with the bourgeoisie the correct revolutionary path?
Well, you draw out the conclusions and enjoy it.
Right, thank you.
Okay, now we actually are out of time, but Yusuf wants to say something quickly. Go ahead. I have to end the program now. It's approaching.
Well, okay, as a CPUSA member, I'd like to respond to that a little bit. The CPUSA does not endorse candidates other than its own. The CPU is not endorsing Biden. We are endorsing dump Trump. Now, it happens that, it means that for this election, it means for a general vote for Biden, that's what is the reality of the situation. So I just want to clarify, the CPUSA does not endorse Biden. We don't endorse any candidate other than our own. Well, maybe unless something very different emerges.
Okay, with that, I think thank you, Wadi'h, for a very thought-provoking and interesting presentation that you made for us. All of us will have a lot to think about it. So we want to give vote of thanks to Wadi'h, and please come back and soon. And I hope to see you in Boston one of these days. I saw your You were there in Boston a few years ago
Yes.
with
And,
Sandeep Chaubey, who is also actually listening to you today from Germany.
Yes.
So, okay, thank you again, everybody, for participating. Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Alan. And this program should be up tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, Wednesday on
How
YouTube.
do you look it up?
Yeah,
how's it looked up?
ICSS Marxist is the name of the channel on YouTube. But I think one of us will send you a link anyway. So you just have to hit that link.
And
So
long live Marxism and long live Nebel Proctor Marxist Library. So thank you
very
so much. This was wonderful.
We're going to stop the recording.
okay, I'm going to stop the recording and stop actually the program after that.
Thank you, Raj.
Thank you. Thank you for your input about what I forgot.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com. And the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.